So I went to an advanced screening of Transformers 1 yesterday. I got this cool commemorative poster there, the last one actually, and I thought I'd sit down while it's still fresh and record my review of it. So I actually went into this movie with zero expectations. The only things I really knew about it were the general cast, like Chris Hemsworth when the fan base made a lot of noise about that, the fact that Josh Cooley was directing it because he directed Toy Story 4 and I'm a big Pixar and Toy Story fan in general, and the fact that it was going to tell the origin story of Optimus and Megatron in the beginning of the war. And overall, I was pleasantly surprised by the film. I would give it a solid 4 out of 5. I think there's a lot of things that work here as a movie in general. There's a lot of things that work for me as a Transformers fan. And likewise, there are a few nitpicks I have just in general and as a Transformers fan. By the way, as the review goes on, there's definitely going to be lots of spoilers. So I'll try to talk at first about the things that are just more general. I thought the animation looked great. I actually didn't know ILM was doing it until the credits rolled. That's really cool. They always bring their A game. I thought the color palette was nice. The action looked great. The texture, the sound, all of that worked for me. There were even a few shots that I thought were genuinely beautiful shots. One of them that stood out to me is after Megatron and Bumblebee get captured by Sentinel Prime. You have Orion Pax kind of moping in the foreground and Alita 1 in the background coming to cheer him up and give him that pep talk. There's a shot there that looked really nice. There were a lot of up-close face shots that looked awesome. Sentinel Prime in general looked great every time he was on screen. So yeah, it's definitely a great looking movie. I think they pulled off the look of Cybertron in a way that's very pretty and palatable, but still maintains that kind of like grungy, metallic, hard-hitting, heavy metal war feel that I like in Transformers. I've always thought that like the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron look, as great as those are, you couldn't really like sit through a whole movie of that. It's just too dreary, too dark. I think this struck the right balance of being like definitely a kids movie, colorful, but also kind of having that grit and metallic feel to it that you kind of come to expect when you look at Transformers and Cybertron in general. The score did leave something to be desired. I actually didn't know that Brian Tyler was doing it until the credits rolled, and this might be a hot take, but I'm not the biggest fan of the Transformers Prime score. Yeah, I think the intro theme is nice and memorable, but throughout the show, if you compare it to a score like Armada or Cybertron, it's actually really flat in my opinion. It definitely feels like it's trying to strive for the live action movie sound, but without nearly the budget or time to compose that many original themes. I love the score from the first 3 live action Bay movies. The last 2 by Bay I'm not very familiar with just because I don't like those movies, but I think the score is still good. But unfortunately, a lot of Transformers media from the Netflix show to Earthspark, the Power of the Primes trilogy, I'm assuming from the little bit I've seen of that, I couldn't get through the whole thing. Unfortunately, a lot of Transformers media, in my opinion, has kind of a forgettable score. In fact, it seems like it's either awesome, like Transformers Devastation or the 2004 Armada video game, or it's like entirely forgettable in my opinion. So that was kind of the one thing that I felt was lacking here was they could have just as well adapted the theme from the Transformers live action Bay movies. I mean, I get they kind of want to start afresh, but why not? People recognize that theme, just like how the Superman theme kind of comes back with reboots. Like, why not bring it back? It's kind of part of the franchise at this point. I mean, they brought back the Unicron theme for parts of the Rise of the Beast score. I don't see why they couldn't have done that in this movie. Unfortunately, I feel like the movie had almost zero musical identity. I mean, it was at least consistent, and they didn't play, like, pop songs over it, which I was kind of scared of based on the trailer, like, in the Mario movie. That would have been terrible. But while watching the movie, I also noticed that the score never really hit me except for one moment. Big spoiler, when Orion Pax is falling to the center of Cybertron, you get this nice kind of wondrous theme to prep you for his transformation into Optimus, and that was a nice moment for sure. That was probably the one standout moment for the score that I actually remember. The pace of the movie feels good. It's not too long. It's only an hour, 44 minutes, I think, which is great. It never feels like it's dragging, though it does feel predictable at times. It's always like on pace, and even though I felt like it doesn't really drag, which is great, I was worried that some of the comedy would drag based on the beats in the trailer, but even those same beats actually play out more smoothly in the film than in the trailer, which was a pleasant surprise. And a good amount of it was pretty funny. I was worried it would try to throw a bunch of references at you in kind of lame and tacky ways, but the one reference to The Touch was really clever actually. Whenever they said lines like, "We're going to prove that there's more to us than meets the eye," it actually kind of worked in that moment. It wasn't like too cringy for me at least. So in terms of like pace and flow, like I wouldn't say it's quite Pixar level fully, like it's not like a Toy Story movie or Inside Out, but you can definitely feel that similar hand of Josh Cooley in the Pixar touch where the character beats are on point, things actually move the story along meaningfully, characters actually change as the story goes on. All of that's there, which is great because, I mean, Transformers has had some bad stuff over the last like 20 years, and there are like entire movies and shows where a character has basically no character development. So this movie is overall breath of fresh air in the Transformers franchise. So in terms of the plot, it definitely borrows from a lot of different Transformers franchises. We start off with Orion trying to learn more about the Matrix and how to make Cybertron better, while also trying to prove himself as more than just a miner. All the ingredients you want in an Optimus figure, I think, and it's nicely done where it feels like he's young and fresh and naive, but you can kind of immediately see the potential for leadership in him and the values within him that are going to make him the Optimus that we kind of know from all the media now. And then you have his friendship with Megatron or D16, which is also great. I think they make for like a great on-screen pair. They're not quite like a Buzz and Woody level, but they're pretty great on-screen friends. It feels like a nice buddy movie for the first third of the movie. Alita is also introduced very naturally, and Alita is also nice and introduced very naturally. There's an incident in the mine in the beginning that kind of really organically sets up Orion as always willing to break protocol if for the sake of caring for someone or saving a life. And I like the way that it kind of pisses Alita off, but also plants respect for Orion later on. I also really like that Alita is not just kind of like fawning over Optimus or Orion or whatever. And I like that there's no romance between them whatsoever. It feels like oftentimes Transformers media will try to plant a romance and just kind of tell you this is a romance without actually doing any work to kind of get you there. And I definitely feel like this movie had no time with everything it had to do to also have that romance. So I'm very glad that they kept Alita and Orion in the group platonic, while still leaving it open for romance in the future if they want to do that. But yeah, that first act of the movie is really nice, getting to know Orion and D16 and Alita. Bumblebee is kind of introduced purely as comedic relief, which is fine. I would have liked to see Bumblebee have a little bit more meaningful of a role in the movie besides in battle. Like, I would have liked to take the idea of him being a scout and kind of having some kind of special instinct or something. He just feels like purely comedic relief throughout the movie. But I get it. You can't have Transformers in 2024 without Bumblebee. I appreciated all the jokes and quips about how he talks way too much and they wish he would shut up, of course, alluding to the fact that he hasn't really talked in Transformers media for like the last 20 years almost. I thought that was funny. I think even some of the general audience will appreciate that quip. So after we get introduced to Orion and D16 as miners, we also immediately get this theme of like classism in the movie, which is that there's a bunch of these guys who are relegated to doing mining and trash compared to like the citizens who live more in like the literal golden palaces and golden buildings of Cybertron in Iacon City. There's clearly classes here, which is of course very important to the origin story. And I think there's been a lot of Transformers media that just kind of alludes to the fact that someone was oppressed and Optimus and Megatron both wanted to fight the oppressor, but they disagreed about how to do it, and then Megatron became the oppressor. And granted, I've never really sat down and read a complete Transformers comic series. I know there's some great stuff there from what I've read. But at least in movies and TV shows, I've never really seen a convincing portrayal of their oppression or the class system or whatever it is that makes them angry and starts the war. So immediately, even though the first third of the movie kind of has like this buddy movie feel to it, it also does a really good job at setting up the class system and seeing that these miners have it worse than everyone else. They're working their asses off. Orion and D16 are like great at it. They're making the best of it, but they could be so much more. All of them could. And yeah, I have a lot of praise for kind of getting to see the whole miner aspect there. And they even justify, you know, what it is they're mining for and why they actually don't need to be mining in the movie. It's very complete. And I feel like a lot of Transformers movies don't give us a complete idea of why Optimus and Megatron started fighting or what the war was about. It's just kind of like, oh, resources were at stake, or there's a MacGuffin like the Allspark or Minicons that we wanted to control. But here it's very nuanced and complete. And it actually ties to real life things like the oppression of the working class and how they want to be more, but the ruling class kind of sets up things in an unfair way such that they'll never get there. As someone who believes that corporations actively do things to make the world worse and keep themselves in power, it's cool to see Transformers finally like step up and try to resonate with those themes that actually resonate with important issues in real life. Like, I think that's cool. And I think that political point, as I phrased it, is someone no one would disagree with if they just thought about it for more than 5 minutes. So yeah, first third of the movie I really liked. Then we have the race sequence, which kind of sets us up to go into the second act where they're going to go to the surface and everything. And I thought that was a fun sequence. Here's one nitpick as a Transformers fan though. Why couldn't you have had Blur or Override or any of the characters who are known for racing in the race sequence? Like, we never really get to see any of the racers. You see some of their names on the kind of scoreboard, but it would have been a great opportunity to see some fan favorites in there. Like, I'm not trying to be like one of those MCU fans who wants every movie to just be endless cameos, but I mean, if you're having that set anyways and there are like all these bodies to fill, why not fill with some of the ones that like we kind of know and recognize? Like, that would have been a really organic way to show an Override or a Vansack, anyone from Speed Planet or Blur or whatever. But I digress. The race sequence is still narratively great. It gets us to the next point where we get introduced to Bumblebee, who I already talked about is just kind of purely comedic relief. And then that gets us to the surface of Iacon, again in a very organic way. I think one of the only few inorganic moments that I felt at this point in the movie was when Orion grabs the map off of Steve's head. And it just felt like way too convenient of a map. Like, you could have eased into it by saying that there's a subsection of the garbage place where like trash from past battles has shown up, and then Orion wants to go digging in it for anything that will get him closer to the Matrix. But instead, it's literally like the first thing Optimus notices on the trash that Bumblebee has kept to the side is a map to the Matrix. It's a little too convenient, but I get it. They're trying to keep the movie brisk. It's for kids, trying to get it to 90 minutes, whatever, keep going. So then we have what I kind of consider to be Act 2, which is everything on the surface, the big reveal of Sentinel's betrayal, introduction to Alpha Trion, etc. And yeah, I liked all this stuff. Again, we get some nice reasons why they're doing the mining. The Quintessons are there. It's a nice way to have the cons there and not say anything too specific about them. You know, we didn't need to like stuff the movie with ideas that maybe they built the Transformers. We don't really need to know anything about them. We don't meet the Quintesson judge. We just know that the Quintessons are like a bigger bad that Sentinel's serving, and that's where the Energon needs to go. And I thought that was kind of a nice way for Transformers fans to be like, oh, look, Quintessons, cool, while also having them serve like a narrative purpose that makes sense and helps you move the story along. Whenever I first saw that they were in the movie in the trailer, I was kind of like, what are they going to do? Like, are they just stuffing like another faction of villains in the movie to make Transformers fans point and clap? But no, they actually like serve a tight purpose in the script, I feel. The actual Sentinel Prime reveal itself was a little bit predictable for me, and I suspect it'll be very predictable for a lot of fans because obviously they already did this in Transformers 3, and in Transformers Animated, Sentinel Prime is not really a bad guy, but kind of a prick. So it was obvious to me, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Again, this is definitely trying to toe the line of being a very kid-friendly movie, so I think that'll be super effective for a lot of kids seeing that trope for the first time. But it was a little bit predictable. But I also think you needed to do something like that to give Orion and D16 a common enemy. I think having them have a common enemy and then having a difference of opinion about, you know, Megatron just wanting to like brutally get revenge and tear it all down, and Optimus having a much more nuanced approach, wanting to forgive. I think that's smart to give them a common enemy so that we clearly see them fall apart in that way. So overall, I like the reveal of Sentinel in the second act. I think he's a fine villain. And I also liked Sentinel himself. I liked the voice performance. I loved the design. I thought he looked great, and I especially love how they have his weapon from Dark of the Moon kind of blended with like the Titans Return body design, but in the colors of animated. They kind of took the best of everything and put it into one. And one of my favorite just like cool 12-year-old action moments was when he kind of put on his battle mask, powered up, and shot all the missiles out. I thought that was super cool. I really wanted to see more of that, actually. I thought he went down too easily. I wanted to see him like tear shit up for a solid 10 minutes. It was awesome. On that note, Black Arachnia is also awesome. I love the way she transforms. I love her action. The multiple eyes were cool, although the part where she kind of like opens the back of her head, even though that looks really cool, it kind of served no purpose in that moment. Like, she was just intimidating Orion by like looking at him with lots of eyeballs. It didn't actually make sense in that moment, but it was a cool design. Okay, so back to the story. Here's where I start to have kind of like a general audience nitpick. I think on paper, the chemistry between Orion and D16, Optimus and Megatron, and the reasons for them growing apart, and the actual kind of like inciting events that tear them apart are all really strong. Like, on paper, this is like a really strong story. But in execution, a lot of things feel really rushed. Like, there's a moment where D16 is telling Orion all about how he just wants to like beat the shit out of Sentinel basically for lying. And whenever he starts that monologue, it feels nice. Like, you get this like, oh, here he goes. He's getting angry. Like, we're starting to see the dark side of him. But then they kind of like overplay it. He just keeps going on and being like furious out of nowhere, especially because in the beginning he was super nice and we never saw that he had any sort of like anger issue or anything. Likewise, whenever we meet Starscream and the High Guard and all that, I thought placing them as like this kind of lost protectors of Cybertron thing hiding from Sentinel was cool, because otherwise, like, why aren't we seeing them walking around Cybertron or fighting already? But again, the transition of Starscream being their leader to them immediately wanting to follow Megatron happened super quickly. And I'm much more of a movie guy than a TV show guy. And I'll never forgive stuff like Kenobi being turned from what seems like a really tight movie into like a super stretched and empty TV show. But this is one movie where I kind of feel like it would be better as a TV show. For example, I think when they're in the High Guard hideout place, if it was a TV show, you would spend a whole episode there getting to know all of them and slowly seeing the troops kind of gain respect for Megatron and start to follow him in the end when he finally beats up Starscream. But in the movie, it feels like it happens over like 2 to 5 minutes. Like, they're following Starscream. Megatron comes in, they kind of beat him down, but then he stands up, beats up Starscream, says a few inspirational words, and suddenly they're all going to follow him to go attack the guy who's been oppressing them for like who knows how long. Again, on paper, I really like that. In the movie, it feels really rushed. But also, again, I get that it's like a kid's movie. They're trying to be more brisk. They're not trying to do like a 2-hour or 2.5-hour movie. So yeah, I'm glad that it works on paper and you can kind of like respect this as an origin story. But actually watching it, you kind of have to like mentally fill in like, oh yeah, this just kind of needs to happen. The dialogue's a little clunky, it's happening fast, but fundamentally this is what needs to happen to get all these Decepticons on Megatron's side, blah, blah, blah. I just wish that they kind of took one more pass at the pacing of moments like that and the dialogue and stuff like that, because I felt like it could have been cleaned up just a little bit further. But that takes us into the final third act, where we're finally going to actually rebel against Sentinel. We have Megatron and Bumblebee trapped by him, and we have this great moment that's probably one of my favorite moments of the movie, where Sentinel brands the Megatronus Prime symbol or his face into Megatron's chest. I thought that whole thing was done very naturally, of having that be Megatronus' face, giving him a reason to kind of wear that around as a symbol, and then having one of his tortures and worst moments be related to being like having that symbol branded into him, which he later wears with like a stubborn, aggressive pride. I thought that was all really good. It made Sentinel feel like a pretty ruthless villain, so probably my favorite sequence from the movie. And then of course we get some great action. I already talked about how much I liked Sentinel. I like all the air action, like all the Autobots kind of jumping around in the air, wearing jetpacks. I felt like Black Arachnia got taken out a little too quickly by Elita 1, given how powerful she seemed to be throughout the entire movie. But that's a small nitpick I can kind of like mentally fill in that maybe someone helped her out there. But yeah, overall, all the action was great. The moment where Megatron shoots Orion is really nice looking. But again, that was one moment where I felt like they could have cleaned it up just a little bit further. I don't remember exactly what he says as he decides to drop him. He says something like, "I'm not going to save you anymore." And it felt like that wasn't as naturally built up to as it could have been. It felt like you could have changed the sequence of events just a little bit more, such that he really feels like Orion's death was Orion's own fault, and that Orion's kind of always getting in the way of him trying to like play it safe or do something that needs to be done. But as it stands, it just feels like the kind of conflict that Megatron has within him is a little bit muddy. Sometimes it seems to be all about he wants to follow the rules. Then we have this clear thread that he wants to get revenge on Sentinel. But how those two things relate, and how that relates to Orion stepping out of line all the time and being saved by him, and why he doesn't want to save him in this instance because he got in the way of his revenge? Like, what does that have to do with following the rules? I don't know. It was just a little bit muddy. I feel like that could have been cleaned up a little bit more. I like the spirit of what they were going for. I still felt the impact of him accidentally shooting him. I just didn't feel like it was supernatural the way he decided to drop him. Maybe you could have just had him fall off the edge by himself, and then he kind of gets angry and goes on a tirade thinking that his best friend had died because of Sentinel. And then when Optimus comes back, he's at first relieved to see him, but then kind of grows to hate him in that moment because of his reaction to Sentinel dying. Or you could have had like another casualty and another person like Jazz or something. I don't want to like kill Jazz again, but you know, you could have done something else to get them to hate each other. Again, on paper, I like it, but in execution, it felt a little bit fast for me. And I think that's the main reason why I'm not giving this a 5 out of 5. I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 because it's a beautiful story on paper. We finally get like a believable, complete story for why the war began, origins for Orion and Megatron. But in execution, it just kind of feels a little bit too fast, a little bit too clunky. It was almost there, and it's still emotionally resonant. It's just not as tight as it could be. On this moment, another thing that I was so sure was going to happen was that we would hear Primus's voice and it would be Peter Cullen, and it wasn't. We just heard Alpha Trion more. I felt like that was a missed opportunity, especially since we saw Primus in the beginning, which was surprising. But no, it's just Alpha Trion, and then when Optimus arrives, it's still Chris Hemsworth, who, by the way, I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. I came in with an open mind, understanding Peter Cullen's not going to do this forever. None of them are. They're trying to find new cast, and celebrity names sell. But I heard way too much Chris Hemsworth in Orion and Optimus. Like, there were way too many lines where I picked up on the accent, and I was like, oh yeah, that's Chris Hemsworth. I felt like in the first third of the movie, it worked really well, but there were a lot of lines, especially once he's tried to start mimicking the Peter Cullen delivery with the ending speech, where it just wasn't working for me, unfortunately. I really wanted it to work. I really wanted to go in with an open mind. I mean, some of like the Mario movie kind of worked for me in ways I didn't expect. Josh Cooley comes from Pixar, and even when Pixar does celebrity voice casting, I feel like they kind of go above and beyond and pick people who really fit. But Chris Hemsworth, it didn't work for me the whole time. I'm sorry. But anyways, when he comes back as Optimus, I was still glad to finally see Optimus Prime on the scene. It felt hype. I loved the battle between Optimus and Megatron. Great choreography. We got everything from them kind of like using their wheels in battle to the axe coming out. And I love the interpretation of the axe as being like something he kind of like opens his hand and holds like with energy he's like manifesting out from himself. And yeah, the fight was great. It felt tense, but kind of also ended at a natural point. It set us up for sequels, which I hope we get. And again, once we saw Alita reunite with Optimus at the end, it felt very natural. I'm glad they kept it platonic again. And you can really see how their relationship went from Orion kind of being under her supervision to now being this leader that she always respected because of the way he acted. And now he's grown into that, and now he's going to be the leader. I thought that worked super well. And then, of course, we got all the other Autobots finally getting their true forms, close-up shots of like Ironhide, Jazz, Wheeljack, Sideswipe, all those guys. A nitpick I have as a Transformers fan is that whole group was way too G1 focused. Like, would have killed them to throw in Hotshot and Red Alert, or even someone who looks like one of the Beast Wars characters from like the bot concept when they're vehicles or something like that. It's the same thing as that racing scene where it's like, come on, you couldn't have put Override in there. Like, there couldn't have been one Armada or Cybertron or Energon or RID character in the ranks of the miners. Instead, they all feel very same, very G1. I'm guessing this comes from one or two places. One, it's like a budget reason. They're trying to keep all the models very similar, reusing parts. There's definitely reuse of models going on in the movie. Or two, it's like a mandate from Hasbro to kind of follow the G1 evergreen train that they've seemingly been on since like Transformers Prime ended, which I kind of hate. I miss when Transformers with every iteration was like brand new. I mean, you had the weirdo Constructicons from Revenge of the Fallen right after the Japanese style Super Mode Optimus from Transformers Cybertron. Megatron looked like radically different in every series. Now it's like Megatron's always going to be gray with a helmet. Optimus is always going to be like a red truck thing with smokestacks right here. We're always going to have Bumblebee. We're always going to have Alita or RC. Ironhide's going to be red. Like, I guess this movie did a decent job with having Sentinel be unique, but other than that, it's very G1. I would have liked to see them mix things a lot more, kind of like Cyberverse did. But yeah, that's a nitpick as a Transformers fan. The general audience won't care about that at all. I just would have liked to see a little bit more diversity in it. But with that being said, I was still happy at the end of the movie. Like I said, I like the way they wrapped up the relationships. I like everything on paper, even though some beats play out too fast and unnaturally for me. It's so cool to finally have like an emotionally resonant Transformers movie that also gives us like a legit reason why Optimus and Megatron hate each other, and a theme of oppression that actually kind of maps onto reality. And even though the Matrix of Leadership is kind of like a MacGuffin in the movie, it's not actually MacGuffin based. Like, it's a relationship driven movie powered by the theme of oppression and classism. And that's awesome. Like this is the kind of things that I want to see Transformers do, is elevate from beyond like, oh, cool robots that need to chase some like sci-fi MacGuffin, to like characters that just happen to be metallic and robotic, which is cool for action and cool for designs and cool for action figures, but that their heart are just like you and me. They have real emotions, real motives. They deal with real issues that are similar to the issues we deal with in real life. And for that, I love this movie. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it to any Transformers fans, and I also recommend it to the general audience. I hope we get a sequel or even a trilogy, and I hope they keep that caliber of writing, and I hope they keep up-leveling it and up-leveling the brand in general, because I don't think I've seen something this good in Transformers besides maybe the one-off Bumblebee movie, which is kind of a mess because of its ties to the Bayverse movie and was never going to get like a proper sequel. Besides that, I don't think we've seen anything this good in years. So go see Transformers 1. Let me know if you disagree or agree with everything I've said here, and stay tuned and subscribe for more Transformers stuff.